Hi, Guinsly. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Amy.
I'm going to share my slides. Looks like a few people are just starting joining, so I guess we can wait another couple of minutes and then get started. Guinsly, sorry, do you know how many people we're expecting for this this session? Should I start or should we give it another minute or two?
We can give it another minute, but let's see, 7 to 4, 6. I was expecting 7, but 2, 6. Yes.
All right. Well, we'll wait till 1 minute after 1 and then we can get going.
We have 2 operators from Toronto who's not online. I mean, 2 new operators from Toronto. And,
okay. Okay, can give it another minute. Okay, why don't we get started since it's a couple minutes after 1? All right, excellent. So welcome back, everyone. For those of you who are with us in the morning, I see a lot of the same names. And welcome to everyone who is joining us for the afternoon or for part of the afternoon. For those of you who are not here in the morning, I'll just reintroduce myself. My name is Amy Greenberg, and I work at Scholars Portal as the Assistant Director for Member Services, of which Ask is one. And I'm going to talk to you now about online communication and handling some of the common types of questions that we see in Ask. The follow-up presentation to this will be on the reference interview, and so there will be a little bit of overlap in the topics, but we're going to be coming at them from a slightly different perspective. So hopefully you won't find it too repetitive, and also sometimes it's just good to have that emphasis on information. So, so a lot of you may have seen or heard of this and this sort of rule of communication, Morabian's rule of communication, which states that of the 3 sort of elements of personal communication, verbal, vocal, and visual, most, 93% of communication is non-verbal. So verbal being just the words that we use. So that only comprises about 7%, this little yellow-orange slice of the pie here. Really, when people talk to each other, a lot of what we're getting is based on things that are paraverbal or visual. So body language, right? My expressions, my face, my hands, the tone of my voice, how I'm talking to you, rather than just the words. And so, of course, the really important thing to take away from this is that when you're communicating just through chat, and many of you probably already sort of, you kind of know this from your personal lives when you're texting with people, all you have to go on are the words that you're using. So we have to try to make up for the lack of some of those other elements of communication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through RUSA, which is the Reference and User Services Association of the American Library Association, has a series of guidelines for behavior based on for reference, and they have certain sort of best practices which they and we have adapted to chat and specifically to our particular online environment. So I'm going to go through their different sort of behaviors, and a lot of these are going to be reiterated in the next presentation as parts of the reference interview, which these behaviors kind of mirror, but there's some overlap among all of them. So anyways, that's what I'm going to do for the next 3 slides, kind of go through different issues with the online environment and then some practical tips for how to deal with them. So the first behavior is approachability. And that's an issue, of course, on chat because it can be hard to build rapport when you're just, messaging people and conveying tone. And of course, some of us may remember when we were first introduced to in-person reference that the person training us told us it was really important to look approachable. So to look up and make eye contact, and we don't have that in chat. So instead, what we recommend are things like not leaving the user hanging. So you try to pick up a chat within 30 seconds, greet the patron by their name if they give it to you, make sure to introduce yourself, and you can kind of mirror their level of formality. So if they're being really formal with their, with the words they're using and they're using full punctuation, you can choose to do that. And if they're being less formal, you can choose to do that as well, to make them more, comfortable. And introducing yourself is a big one because the system sort of refers to you, I think, as librarian or operator. So it's always nice to kind of build in a bit more of that personal approach into the system. So the next general behavior is interest. In other words, making sure that you express to the patron that you are showing interest in what they're doing. And again, kind of the issue here is that, again, we're lacking that visual communication. So unlike at a reference desk, the patron can't see that you're going to a website and searching, or you're looking for something. So we need to have a lot of communication to just clue them into what we're doing. And also, of course, the patron is really, is really stressed out. They're coming to us generally because they have a problem, they have a question. So therefore, for the best practices, we have things like, I'll start at the bottom, acknowledge the user's experiences and feelings. So if they're having trouble, commiserate with them. If they're working on something that's going to help them, finish their paper or finish a thesis, then you can say, wow, like, congratulations on being so close. Good luck with your work. There are lots of opportunities like that can just show that you're expressing interest in them and what they're doing, as well as telling them that you are interested in what they have to tell you. So a key thing there is that third one from the bottom, communicate transition. So sometimes you'll have to transition away from directly communicating with them to going off and doing some searching to help them with sources. So whenever you have to do something like that, just make sure that they know why you're not talking to them anymore. Say, all right, you know what? I'm going to go see if I can find something that will help you, or I'm going to go search this database to find examples for you. Just let them know what you're doing. And another thing to do there is to make sure that you maintain word contact. So even while you're searching, it's not a bad idea to pop back into the chat and say, I'm still looking, just give me another couple of minutes or something like that. And just as a general best practice throughout the interaction, be positive, be casual, and don't be afraid to be expressive. Again, we're missing the vocal tone, we're missing gestures and eye contact. So you can be, don't be afraid to use like exclamation points. You could even use emojis to help you out in conveying some of that tone and be positive. It might feel like a bit much, but the user will generally appreciate it. Of course, key to a reference interview, and you'll hear more about this in the next presentation, is listening and inquiring to make sure that you understand what it is that the patron wants. And this is a stage that can take longer in chat than in person, because you just need to kind of make sure that you do understand, despite the fact that, of course, the user may be feeling some time pressure, and you may be feeling time pressure because you might be juggling multiple chats. But it's always, it's always best not to take shortcuts and to conduct a thorough reference interview, which again, you'll hear about in the next presentation, and to just check back and make sure that you've understood what the user wants. And then, of course, it's good to set realistic expectations if you think it's going to take a while to figure things out, or if you know of something along the way that might delay the process. And you can ask for feedback along the way too. Like, you can say, I think we'll start here, or my plan is to do this and then this. Does that sound good? Or double checking whether it's something that the user has already tried. Of course, you never want to library shame anyone, so never make them feel bad for asking what they're asking. And just, again, remembering our sort of previous slide of just being kind and being positive, and never, you never want to make the patron feel bad for asking a question. But sometimes on chat, it can be a little more difficult to create that tone. So just, again, be positive and expressive, and check back in with the patron to make sure that you're working with them in the best way that you can. So while you're searching and helping the patron along, the key issue here is really trying to find that right balance of answering the patron's questions right away and teaching them how to answer that question. We definitely, in an ideal world, we really want patrons to be able to become more self-sufficient, but sometimes in a chat you will definitely get the impression that the user just does not have time, or they're like too stressed out, and they're not really interested in knowing how to do something. Having said that, one of the questions we ask in the post chat survey is whether users feel like they are getting too much information, and very few of them do feel that way. So as a default, we always say that it's better to err on the side of teaching, and as it says there in the first point, provide instruction so that patrons can follow along. So you always want to break down the steps that you're taking. And on chat, another important thing to remember is, instead of typing in huge paragraphs, sorry, my phone is ringing. Instead of typing huge paragraphs of text, write 1 or 2 lines at a time, just so that the patron doesn't have a ton of information to process. that's just one thing to kind of, to be aware of. And Guinsly demonstrated in the morning how library help has lots of ways where you can send screenshots or files. You can send URLs that will help explain what you're talking about. So do make use of all those things so that you don't have to type out a lot of sort of textual explanation where possible. Sometimes, sometimes you will have to, and that's fine. Okay, so the next one is, and again, this is part of the reference interview, the follow-up, right? You never want the patron to feel that you are just like getting rid of them, or we want to try to avoid that feeling of like an abrupt ending. So you always want to make sure at the end that you've answered their original question, and sometimes you can't, and that's okay. But do try to, provide an alternative. So referring to somebody else, whether it's at their library or another chat operator, it's always best to ask if they have any other questions. Sometimes when they see that you've answered their first question, they will think of another one for you to ask and for you to answer, and that's totally fine. We also recommend, and some of these are built into the canned messages that Guinsly demonstrated in the morning. Thank them for using the service, invite them to come back if they have any other questions, ask them to fill out the user survey so we know how we did, all that stuff. So try wherever you can to just avoid that like abrupt, that abruptness to the end of the chat. So there are two cases listed on this slide here. We've called them sort of common misunderstandings. I don't know that they're misunderstandings as much as just things that patrons may not realize about the service, but that you as an operator will always, obviously will always be aware of. So the first one here on the left is that because Ask is branded as a local service, patrons will just sort of come with the, belief that the operator, is from their own home library, and or that you are physically present in the library. Probably that second one is not going to be so much of an issue in the next few months with COVID, but certainly the belief that you are like a local person at their library is one that is there. And to be honest, we don't necessarily recommend that you come out and say that you're not at their library. A good sort of workaround to this is just saying, if there's something they ask you to do that you can't, you can sort of say, oh, I'm physically not in the library right now, but I can do, I can't do X, but I can do Y. And so it's always best to just make an attempt to answer the question, even if you feel that the question requires local knowledge, and then refer to someone at their library if you have to. But don't come right out when you see a question. Don't come right out and say, oh, sorry, I'm not actually, I can't answer that because I'm not at Ryerson, I'm actually at Guelph. Just try to answer the question first. And that just sort of generally gives the users a bit more kind of confidence, I guess. The other thing that users are generally not aware of is that operators tend to be juggling multiple chats. So whether you are concurrently working on 2 or 3 chats, or you're aware that you've got kind of someone waiting while you help one patron, right? Users are not aware, and nor should they really have to be. You can tell them, and that's completely fine. We do have one of those canned messages that says, I'll be with you in another few minutes. I'm just helping another patron. That's a case where transparency is great. You can let them know why you might be a little slow to respond. Tell them that you're busy. But again, make it obvious that you are paying attention to their question. You're not just stalling them, or if you are, you're doing it for a good reason. So just kind of keep the patron in the loop, because remember, they can't see what you're doing. It's a chat atmosphere, so they only know as much as you tell them. And we find that users on the service are generally pretty happy to wait if you just explain to them why it is that they have to wait. So that is a sort of a brief overview of those stages of interacting with the patron, which again, you'll hear more about after this presentation. I wanted to switch gears for a few minutes and talk a little bit about tips or strategies for handling common types of questions that you're gonna see on the service. So you might remember this pie pie chart here from one of the presentations in the morning. And this is our breakdown of types of questions that people ask on the service. These were based on samples of chat questions from 2016. Actually, we did the analysis initially when we first started up the service in 2011, 2012, redid them in 2016, and the proportions have stayed pretty similar. So if we sample again, I'm guessing we'll probably find a similar breakdown. So just to remind you, we get about 56% of the questions on the service are research or reference related, and those break down mainly to I need to find sources for a topic, so we'll talk about that, or searching for a known title that for whatever reason they're having trouble with. And then the non-reference questions tend to be broken down into like policy, so library policy, hours, borrowing, that kind of thing. Questions about the library account, access to e-resources, and help with citations. And again, a lot of these questions are really not so different from questions you would get if you were doing like in-person, help or email reference. So some of what we're going to talk about too is how to deal with these in the context of ask, where you might be helping someone from a different school. Okay, so pretty standard reference type question, sources on a specific topic. So these questions on the left are examples of real chat questions that we've gotten. I have to write a research paper about school lunch programs. I don't know where to start. Or my professor says I need to cite 3, peer-reviewed articles. How do I find Canadian Indigenous scholarly authors? I need primary sources about the Suez crisis. So all that kind of thing. So where to start? I mean, it helps, I guess, if you think of what your own school provides for these types of things. And, most schools offer the same types of resources. So research guides, right? Libraries love to put together research guides. And very often, if you search the library website, you will find that there's a research guide for either, possibly not for the specific topic you're looking for, that's always great, but generally for, the broader subject, maybe sometimes even for the course, if it's a big undergrad course and there are, typical topics that profs want students to research every year. A lot of libraries will put together research guides specifically for that course, right? You can help the user, you can and should help the user brainstorm for keywords. So that's a big part of the reference interview, right? Thinking about how to break their question down, what words would they use to search some databases or research guides, and what are synonyms for those words. And that's a great activity to do with the user, because often you may not know about that specific subject. So they may be sort of like the subject experts, but you know how library resources work, and you can help them think about how to frame their question. A lot of databases have a checkbox, to only search for peer-reviewed articles. So that's, in this case here, the second one where my prof says I need, articles from a peer-reviewed journal, or you can always check the Ulrich's database too. And sometimes, if it's going to be a real in-depth question, or maybe something that they need, it's, they don't just need like a start on their paper, but they need someone to really help them do like a super thorough deep dive into the topic, and they just need more time, and they need someone who is maybe more of a specialist in that topic. You can always refer, but always best to help them start out. And those are some ways that you can, things to look for on the library's website. I should say too that of course, since we are a consortial service, and Guinsly talked about this in the morning, every school has put together a profile in library help. So you should always be looking at the school's profile. They will often, if not always, have a link to the page where their research guides are, or where their popular databases are, and things like that. So that's, you can always check on the, check the library's profile in library help to get you started too. So as I mentioned earlier, another really common area that we get questions on is sort of library policy, borrowing information. So it might be something like, I'm an alumni, do I still have access to online resources, or I'm having trouble logging into my library account. I am a student at another university, but I'm in Toronto for a few weeks. Can I use the Ryerson Library? Or, I need this book that the library doesn't have. How can I get it? That kind of thing. So again, especially for stuff like local user information, school's library help profile is your like #1 go-to, because it will give you the pages where all that stuff is laid out, borrowing policies, walk-in user, alumni, all that stuff. You can always, of course, search the library website. Also, don't be afraid to ask the user to wait a couple minutes, pick up the phone and just call someone at the library. For those libraries that will be open in the fall, you know, there, again, in the library profiles, you will see phone numbers for the circulation desk or the, you know, user services. So if you feel like you can get that information just by talking to someone at the patron's library, go for it, and, you know, and do it. And again, sometimes because if you are not at the same institution as the user, there may be a question related, like where you really need to like log in and look at their actual account. And most of the time, the proxy information you get through Ask will not be sufficient for you to be able to see the details of that patron's account information. And so you will need to refer them to their home institution. Okay, this is a super popular one. And I anticipate that in these days, with lots of students working from home, you're going to see a lot of questions about, help, I can't access this e-resource, right? Maybe I get an error message, or I can't find it, or I'm there, but it's telling me I have to pay. Or I'm looking it up in the catalog and it says it's in storage. Like, what does that mean? So all sorts of great questions in this area. So a lot of this comes down, well, not a lot, I should say, sometimes it will come down to verifying that the citation that they have is correct. So that's always a good thing to check. You can put in information to Google Scholar or even like WorldCat and kind of see what you get there. If the patron is off campus, which will, sorry about that. Got a little too excited there. If the patron is off campus, make sure that they are that they're proxying in. You can ask them for the URL they're using, and usually in the URL there will be something to indicate that there's the proxy information is there. If they're having trouble getting a direct link to the exact article that they need, start broader. So look first at for the journal title and see whether it's something that library has access to online, and then like dig down to the volume, etc., till you find it. Could be a browser issue, so you might want to get them to try different browsers. If when you replicate their issue, you see the same problem, so it does look like it's an actual problem with the e-resource itself, report it to that school. Again, in the library profile, I think most libraries have included information on how to contact their like e-resource troubleshooting people. So certainly if the user's having trouble and when you're helping them, you're running into the same error, report it to the school. They're always really happy. Happy is maybe not the right word, but they appreciate when we, you know, finding a problem and then reporting it so that, you know, so that they can fix it. And of course, sometimes it's not a matter of an error, but just that the library doesn't hold that item, and that then you can help them with interlibrary loan, you know, with Racer if there's no full text at that library. And again, with these kinds of sort of error messages, getting them to send you URLs or screenshots can be a great way to help troubleshoot these kinds of things. All right, so I gave you a sneak peek of this. Citations, a big one. How do I cite this? I've got this particular case where an author is quoting another author. How do I cite that? We also sometimes get questions about writing. So like, hey, if I send you a draft of my paper, can you proofread it? So I'll start with the bottom here. We are not a writing service, but again, a lot of libraries at different institutions do have partnerships with writing services. So feel free to double check that for the user's home library and refer them to whatever their local, whatever their local writing service may be. In some cases, there isn't a clear answer in terms of how to go about citing or formatting something, and it comes back to instructor preference. So you might want to, it's a bit annoying for them, but sometimes you might want to like just get them to double check if their instructor has a preference for something. Again, checking their library profile or the library website for help in terms of where you can refer for Writing Center help. And then, of course, local research guides. Usually most libraries will have their own research guide on how to cite. There's also, most of you probably know about this one, OWL at Purdue is a big one for citation help. So there's lots of library guides around that will help you answer citation questions for the patron. And then once you tell them where to find answers, that's a great like instruction moment where you can tell them about those resources. So those are a few of the common questions, and key things to keep in mind here and just in chat, right? You may find you get questions about, you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything about this topic. I don't know about the Suez Canal crisis. I don't know about, organic chemistry. But that's okay, because the user's not coming to you because you're a subject expert. They're coming to you because you know about the library, and you know more about, even if you don't think you do, you know more about the library and the library resources than they do. And the great thing about chat is that you can really work together with the patron to get the answer. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure, but let's work through this, or here's how I would go about, finding the answer to this question. That's a great way to do it. It can help the user. It reassures them that it sort of sets expectations, but it also reassures them that you are going to work with them. You're not going to say, oh, I don't know, I can't help you. I'm going to, refer you to someone else. Working together is awesome. And, library websites have a ton of information out there, especially the research guides. So, always feel free to take the time to go and check those, and then get back to the user or remind them that their library has these research guides. Those are there. You can find a lot of information that way. Having said that, sometimes you just can't answer the question, either because it's not suitable for chat, or it's not something that we offer, like that, proofreading, or, and in that way, informed referral. So, referring the patron, but making sure that you're really referring them to the best of your ability to a person who can really help them. So they're not going to be, bounced around again and again. And, the wonderful thing about consortial chat is that you are not alone, right? You always are online with other colleagues. And even if there isn't anyone, let's say it's someone from a particular school that you're not familiar with, even if there isn't an operator from that school online at the same time as you, just, feel free to go to the group chat area in Library Help and just ask your colleagues for advice. Everyone on the service is helpful. We're all here for the same reason, to help answer patrons' questions and give them a good library experience. And people are always really, really keen to help. You'll see too that sometimes, especially at the beginning of the semester, when classes get up and running and there are big courses with assignments due, occasionally operators from those schools will send an email to the all staff list saying, just a heads up, Toronto has this big undergrad class and you might see a lot of questions about X. So and here are some hints for how you can answer those questions. So keep an eye out for those emails, because sometimes there's just too much information, to share in chat. So those are great. And if you know of something coming up at your own school like that you think might be good to give other operators a heads up, by all means, feel free to share that information on the list, or you can always ask Guinsly to put something up as a blog post on the Ask wiki to share with other people. So there are lots of ways to help share information with your fellow operators, and ways that you can ask for help or advice. So don't hesitate to do that. And that is the end of the presentation. So I'll just see whether anyone have any questions or comments or concerns. I forgot to change my name. Okay, I'll let you meditate on that information. And thank you all for your attention. And I guess whoever is up next, I think it's Kathryn. Is it Kathryn?
Hello, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure everything is working. I'm just gonna figure out how to share my screen so I can take over from you. You'd think I would know the deal by now. We've been working online for quite a while now. All right, I'm just gonna ask for your confirmation. You're able to see my presentation.
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I lost the chat there. Bring that up again. Okay, yeah.
Donna says
great.
Also she can see it. Great, thank you.
Perfect, thank you so much. We're all dealing with new technology and new things right now, aren't we? All right, so thank you for inviting me here to your training. My name is Kathryn Barret, and I'm a liaison librarian at the University of Toronto Scarborough. And I've been invited in because I'm the Scarborough campus's chat coordinator. I also previously worked at Scholars Portal running the Ask Chat service, and I've been a chat operator for over 6 years now. So I've spent most of my professional career thinking about virtual reference. So I'm excited to be talking about it once again. So I'm here to talk about the reference interview today. And you might be wondering, well, you know, if you're a recent library school graduate, you've probably, you know, familiarized yourself, you've taken a reference course already, and I'm sure many of you are also, you know, experienced library staff members. So this is probably going to seem a little bit basic to you, but we did think it was important to discuss, just because in the virtual environment, we found in reviewing the chat transcripts on Ask that this is often a step that's actually overlooked online. I think there's sometimes the perception that chat questions are maybe a little bit simpler and don't require a really in-depth interview, or there's sometimes the pressure to deal with questions really quickly. So you just want to dive into the searching and information retrieval stage. But we did want to take a step back and just really emphasize that questioning is still really important in the online medium. So just to make sure we're on the same page, we'll go with just a quick definition of the reference interview. So it's a dialogue between the user and the librarian in which the librarian's objective is clarification and understanding of the user's question as a means to meet the user's information need. And the user's objective is to have the librarian understand and meet the need. So what I really want to highlight out of this statement and this definition is that this should be a conversation. So the user's goal is to share their information need and make sure that it's understood so that it can be met. And the librarian's role in this process is to ask as many questions as possible to make sure they're really clear before they get into the searching stage. So there really should be a back and forth of information here and a bit of a more conversational tone. And once again, just want to stress that almost every conversation needs at least one question before you dive into searching, even if it seems a little bit straightforward. And I'll give some examples of that as we go on. So the primary objective of this part of the chat is to get the patron the information that they want. So that's always the goal of why you're going through this period of questioning. But there can be two other kind of stealthy missions that you could inject into the reference transaction as well. And the first is that as you're meeting the user's information needs, this is an opportunity to promote your library, or if you're dealing with another school's patron, to promote their library. So this can be highlighting the resources that are in the collection. It could be bringing attention to a particular service or even a space in the library. So it's really a chance to really bring attention to what we do. And then as well, because we're academic institutions participating, we also want to have a bit of a teachable moment in a lot of our chats. So there's also normally an opportunity to provide instruction, especially if you're trying to explain a process or go into how it is that you can perform research on the library website. So those are two other things that you can also prioritize as you're working through the reference interview. Reference interview is almost can be conceived as a conversation. It follows a similar structure. So you open up with a greeting, you have a bit of a back and forth, a getting to know you period, of figuring out what that person wants, and then you'll go off and search for information and share it back to the user, and then close up and wrap up that interaction. And so the stage that's often a little bit overlooked, as I mentioned, is question negotiation. So if you're a new operator, I really want to stress that this is some area to pay attention to as you get started on the service. So the reference interview is guided by a kind of common professional standard, and that's known as the Guidelines for Behavioral Performance of Reference and Information Service. And this is a guideline and standard that's put out by RUSA, the organization. And so I'm just going to give a quick overview or refresher. So the RUSA guidelines identify and recommend behaviors that contribute to a successful reference transaction. And these behaviors are actually things that lead to success as perceived by the user. So they're informed by feedback that patrons have provided. And they're twofold, essentially. So the success of the reference transaction depends, first of all, on meeting the information's needs. So that's very dependent on the accuracy of the information that's provided. But there's also a more interpersonal element of this as well. So even if you provide really accurate information, if the quality of the interaction between the patron and the staff member isn't strong or isn't positive, it can still be perceived as a failure by the user. So I want to really highlight that communication is a big part of this, but also tone and interest and other things like that that come across. So the RUSA guidelines are organized into 5 behavioral attributes, and these are visibility and approachability, interest, listening and inquiring, searching, and follow-up activities. And the guidelines are organized according to 3 categories. So these are behavioral attributes that are important across kind of any reference interaction, no matter the medium. So these are general. They are also organized just for in-person interactions and then remote ones as well. So that's where virtual reference falls. And I'm going to really stress the things that are unique to remote interactions here today. And why is it that RUSA really felt like it was important to have specific virtual guidelines? This is because virtual reference has some unique challenges as compared to in-person reference. So first of all, technology can act as a bit of a barrier for the patron. So there are lots of technical mishaps that can happen, you know, getting a good internet connection, being able to navigate a website, for example, things that sometimes we take for granted that people understand, but that can actually be really tricky for some folks. And then I know you've heard a little bit about online communication today, so I'm sure you've heard that any kind of lack of visual or nonverbal cues can also be an issue in understanding what someone needs. And then, of course, because you're relying on textual messages, you can get out of sync sometimes in your written conversation and your written dialogue. So there can be long periods of what we call radio silence, which is just not hearing back over chat, or word contact is an issue as well. So you're not really sharing what's happening behind the computer screen. And then it can also be difficult to teach and to demonstrate processes when you're dealing with the online world. So I know typically at the reference desk, you might tilt over the computer and show someone what you're doing on the library website, but if you're not using any kind of screen sharing, that can definitely be tough to get across online. And then as Amy was stressing in her presentation just now, the consortial context can be an additional wrinkle as well. So even if you feel like you have a really good handle on your own library services and resources, there are always going to be other libraries within Opal that are a bit more of a mystery to you that you might not deal with quite as often. And so you might need to do a bit more questioning there. All right, so let's dive into those behavioral attributes I mentioned so we can start talking about what leads to a successful virtual reference transaction. So first is visibility and approachability. And during this stage, or according to this category, the goal is to make the patron feel comfortable in a situation that could be intimidating, confusing, or overwhelming. So to some folks, actually getting in contact with a librarian in any channel can be a little bit stressful or anxiety-inducing for them. And it can always also be really challenging to admit you don't know something. So the goal here is just to make the patron feel comfortable with chatting with you. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that online. And the first is just to make contact as soon as possible, to make sure that the chat isn't just hanging there in the ether and not accepted by anyone on the service. So this is the equivalent of smiling and making eye contact at the reference desk and greeting someone. So this translates as just picking up the chat and sending a welcome message as soon as possible, ideally within 30 seconds of the chat being submitted. And then in your first message, the goal is to be as personal and friendly as possible. And so one thing that I always do at this stage of the reference interview is actually help the patron put a name to the person that they're dealing with. So introducing myself and saying, hi, this is Kathryn, how can I help you, for example, so that it's not cold and impersonal, because in the chat interface, I believe it just says librarian. Your name isn't really attached to the chat unless you offer it. And think of this just as a conversation. So try and make it a little bit more informal and warm and friendly. And then if you're going through a really busy period, I know it can feel tough to pick up chats really quickly, but if you feel like you're not going to be able to get to the patron's question right away, just acknowledge them, greet them, and let them know that there's just going to be a little bit of a wait, but at least then they know that they're connected to someone, that their question has been acknowledged, and it will be gotten to really quickly. Next is interest. So when we're dealing with this category, the goal is to embrace each patron's information need and be committed to providing effective assistance. So this can sound really lofty and a little bit hard to do, but in practice, this is what Amy was talking about a little bit earlier. It's just signaling that even if you don't know something or you're not quite sure what the answer is, that you're at least willing to give it a try. So it's never just telling the patron no and doing nothing. It's always, at least being willing to look into something or trying to find another alternative. And anytime you have to say no or you're looking into something, just sharing the steps of what you're doing so the patron really knows that you've put in a good effort on their behalf. And as you're doing so, just being responsive to any messages that they're sending so that they know that you're taking their issue seriously, and that you're kind of invested and involved in the chat. And that can come across as just staying in word contact, which is a fancy way of saying whenever the patron sends you a message, doing your best to get back to them quickly and sending them a message back. Another important element of the interest stage is just acknowledging some of the negative emotions, or positive, if you're having a really good interaction with someone, that the patron is bringing into the chat. So often when someone decides they need to get in touch with us over chat, it's because they've maybe had a rough experience on the library website. Maybe they're really frustrated because their research isn't going well, or they maybe are feeling like they're behind on a research assignment, for example. Or maybe just something is, broken. Maybe a link is broken on the catalog or a database is down. And so sometimes they get to us at the beginning of the chat and they're upset. So sometimes that just means listening to what they have to say, apologizing on behalf of the library sometimes if something is broken on our website, acknowledging that what they're going through is really tough. And often that just relieves some stress if they feel like they have someone who's there to listen, and that acknowledges the tough time that they've been through. And then, of course, always being there to say, well, okay, let's see what we can actually do together, and being really constructive and trying to move forward there. And anytime you're dealing with a frustrated user, try and focus on using positive language and tone. And casual and informal language is completely okay. There's no pressure to use kind of business formal language when you're dealing with instant messaging like we are. And just to provide a little bit of evidence here and there, I'm just going to share some of the research that College Portal staff and staff at the University of Toronto have performed about the Ask Chat service. So we coded a bunch of chat transcripts according to different operator behaviors that are correlated with the RUSA behavioral attributes. And we also ran some statistical tests to see what related to user dissatisfaction. And what we found is that showing a lack of interest or having a really negative tone, so for example, being rude or being cold or acting disinterested, this very strongly is related to an increase in dissatisfaction. So this is something we really want to try and stay away from, because we found that it is very important to our Ask Chat users. But on the flip side, using an informal communication style actually decreases dissatisfaction. And we found that this was more pronounced in chats that were going poorly, or where the user was obviously upset or frustrated. So don't be afraid to be a little bit more casual than you might be in typical business communication. Next is listening and inquiring. So this refers to identifying the patron's information needs in a manner that puts the patron at ease. So what does that really mean? It really just boils down to not treating the reference transaction or interaction as an interrogation, and really tone is super important here. You want to be receptive to the information they're sharing, be polite, and be supportive throughout the transaction. And I want to highlight again, I feel like I'm, keep reiterating it, but it's because it's really important. Users express their information needs in very incomplete ways. And this is especially the case on virtual reference. So given all those verbal ambiguities and vague questions that we have to deal with, it's really important to continually rephrase the statements that your patrons are making, and to ask open questions so that the patron has to share as much information as possible. So try and stay away from yes or no questions and actually get them to elaborate on what it is that they need. And part of listening is also acknowledging library anxiety that patrons might feel. So try and stay away from any kind of library jargon or library terms, and avoid assuming they have any prior knowledge about the library or research, because that can make them sometimes feel a bit stressed or a bit defensive if they feel like they don't know anything. So try and keep things pretty basic and explain any of the terms you're using. So even though the term ILL is super, obvious to us, it's not the patron necessarily. I thought this quote was actually very illustrative of life on virtual reference. So chat interviews often take longer because the questions that would be ambiguous at the reference desk, maybe even more confusing online, and there aren't any real visual cues to add to understanding. And consortial reference actually adds a whole other layer of complexity to this interaction because you might be less familiar with what other libraries have to offer. And one story I always like to tell is once I was on Ask Chat, I was there as the Scholars Portal operator that day, and I got a question asking, when is so-and-so going to be back in the library? And I assumed that that must be a librarian or any kind of member of library staff at that particular institution, but I didn't know the name. So I asked some questions to the patron to figure out, oh, is this a particular liaison librarian they were looking for maybe? And it turns out through questioning that the name that they were referring to was actually the name of the therapy dog that was visiting the library. So I assumed that they were talking about a person, but it wasn't even a human at all. So don't take anything for granted, and definitely really make sure that you're asking questions before you move forward, because you might spend a lot of time looking into something and then turn out you're wrong, and that can be really frustrating for everyone involved. And then just to share what this means in terms of Ask Chat research, again, when we looked at chat transcripts, we found that surprisingly, asking clarifying questions can sometimes increase the user's dissatisfaction, but this is a really essential part of the reference interview. So we don't want to tell you not to do it. Chat reference just doesn't work if you don't ask questions. So to help kind of mitigate this effect, what we recommend is to give context to your question. So sometimes it could feel to the patron like you're just needlessly slowing down the process by interrogating them, but let them know why you need to know this information and why it's important. Also be mindful of the user's time, so try and prioritize open-ended questions that will give you as much data or information as possible, rather than firing off 6 or 7 yes or no questions in a row. And then acknowledge the time that they're investing by sharing this information with you. So make sure you say thank you if they've clarified something and it's been really important. But even though sometimes this can increase dissatisfaction, it really is an essential step. All right, next we're going to move on to searching. So as I said, the interpersonal and communication aspect of the reference interview is essential, but without an effective search, you're still not fully succeeding at the reference interview. So a couple of things that I really want to stress about this stage is that we do want to prioritize some active learning on the part of the patron. So I know that it's really tempting, I guess, to go off and do all of the searching on your own because it might feel like it's a little bit quicker, but do try and give the patron some control over the search strategy and the research process. So this might be getting them maybe to suggest a couple of keywords or to give feedback about some of the search results that you're providing, because this can lead to some better instructional outcomes. And so this can be leading the patron through a process, for example, by sharing a path through the website to maybe enter a database, for example, or modeling how you're going to lay out your search terms in the database, for example. And then another thing that's proven to be quite helpful is metacognition. So getting the patron to think about how they're thinking about research. So this can be just explaining your thought process about why you've chosen to do something in a specific way, and sort of learning to think like a librarian almost. And one kind of challenge that comes up at this stage is maybe getting a little bit out of sync with the patron. So sometimes you're sending them instructions or asking for feedback, but that might be a couple of messages behind you. So just try and wait for them to confirm that they've done something before you move forward so that they don't feel like they're rushed or confused. And sometimes this can be really helpful to use some of the features of the chat platform. So for example, in library help, you can take a screenshot, for example, and then share it with the patron. So that can help if they're a little bit confused about where you're looking. You can maybe mark up a screenshot with an arrow, for example, and that can be really helpful. One thing I've noticed about virtual reference is that there's a pretty strong desire to provide a really quick response. There's always this feeling of time pressure because there's the impression that things online should just be quicker than in person. But this can be hard to balance out with the desire to be instructive and to incorporate teachable moments into chat. So I wanted to take a moment just to talk about our philosophy of service on Ask a Librarian, and you might have heard this before, but the goal of the service is to help patrons become more self-sufficient library users. So whenever it makes sense, do try and provide some library instruction throughout the chat, but we do acknowledge too that you have to take your cues from the user. So if you're getting the feeling that they're really pressed for time and they're in a rush and they just want to get out as quickly as possible with the information they need, maybe that's not the time for teaching. But if you're getting the sense that the patron is asking, how to do something and would be on board to learn something new, then you can incorporate instruction. And sometimes what I do is, this comes up a lot when people are asking for full text, for example. If they say, oh, I need the full text of this article, I provide the link, but then I'll offer to explain how I got it. And then the patron has the opportunity to opt out if they're in a rush, but hopefully they will opt into learning. And typically they do. All right, and then the final thing that we need to cover is follow-up. So you've made it to the end, you've made it through your reference interview. Hopefully you're having a really great time with the patron. So now is the time to check in about whether they're satisfied with the results of the search. So this is just asking if they, you've completely answered their question and also giving them the opportunity to follow up with a new question. So don't assume that just because you've fulfilled that information need that there is nothing else afterwards. So do leave time to give the patron the opportunity to check any links or information that you provided and to write back. So make sure to follow their pace so that they're not feeling like they're rushed. And the other thing to keep in mind is that most patrons have a pretty strong preference for how they get their library help. So they've opted into chat normally for a particular reason because it's their preferred communication channel. So try and keep everything within the chat if possible. So I know sometimes there might be the temptation to maybe send them to a phone number, for example, or to tell them to go in person, of course, during non-COVID times. But often they're really tied to chat and they'd love it if everything is resolved there. So if you do need to make a referral, if it's possible to be the intermediary and to pick up the phone like Amy was mentioning before and ask a question on their behalf to one of your colleagues, do that if you have the time and you're comfortable doing so. But we do acknowledge that, of course, referrals are an essential part of library service, and there are times you can't do everything within the chat. And this has been borne out by our research. So we found that actually making a referral or a transfer can actually increase dissatisfaction. But as I said, just like asking clarifying questions, this is sometimes unavoidable. So just do acknowledge or set expectations at the beginning of the chat. So if you know there's something you're not able to do over chat, let them know quickly before it proceeds so that they have the opportunity to go elsewhere. So this comes up often when there's questions about library accounts, for example, and you're not able to access them from over chat. And as I said, don't be afraid to be the middleman in situations where that makes sense. So for example, if you're dealing with a patron from your own institution and they maybe have a question about circulation policies and you don't know and you can't find it online, then you can always ask one of your colleagues in that department and then share the information back if that's possible. And we've also found that mutual chat endings decrease dissatisfaction. So if there's been a very clear wrap-up message sent and the user knows that the chat is ending and the librarian knows as well, that's when the users are most satisfied. So try and stay in sync and also try not to make the patron feel like you're limiting their time. So just give them the opportunity to either ask another question or to let you know that that's all they need. So to tie everything together, I think this is a really great quote. Users want access to information that is accurate, that is convenient, and that is timely, but they also want to develop a good relationship with the librarian and feel comfortable on the service. And the main reason that people don't use virtual reference is actually unhelpful answers, but this can mean a couple of different things. So it could mean that they didn't get the specific information they were seeking out, so the kind of search element of the reference interview failed, or it could be that they really wanted to have a positive interaction with the librarian, but maybe that didn't come to pass. So on that note, communication is really, really, really important, and so is the kind of interpersonal aspect of chat. And so just make sure that you're really thinking about your language, your tone, displaying interest, all of those sort of intangible things to bring the personal element to something that can be very kind of cold and technological. All right, so now we have some time for questions. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see the chat again. And I'll just check if there were any questions. Oh, we had some links. Oh, I'm glad someone enjoyed my pet therapy story. That's my favorite thing that ever happened when I was an Ask Operator.
That is the best. That is the best story. I love that. I love that one. Great. I need the dog.
Giving people to think and type just in case there are any final questions. All right, it doesn't look like it. I'll just pop my email address in the chat in case anyone wants to reach out and ask any questions later on. As I said, even though I'm not at Scholars Portal, I'm still thinking about chat all the time, and I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. So if there are no final questions, thanks so much for listening. It was great to see Scholars Portal family again. Hello, Amy and Guinsly. Like forever since I've seen you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, we are not shy at Scholars Portal about bringing in people who were formerly at Scholars Portal and asking them to help us out.
Okay, I have so many presentations ready to go about this topic anytime. All right, so I'll pop my contact info in the chat in case anyone needs it, but if not, I will mute myself and we can carry on with the next presenter, I guess.
I will let Guinsly remind us of the agenda since I don't have it up in front of me at the moment.
Yes, thanks, Kathryn. We'll have a 15-minute break. Our next presentation is at 2:15, and it will be Inclusive Public Service by Katya. So.
Okay, well, I guess that's me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katya Pereyaslavska, and I'm the Accessibility Librarian at Scholars Portal. And this afternoon, I'll take a little bit of your time to talk about inclusive public service, what it means to practice inclusion in your work as an Ask Operator, but also thinking more broadly about university campuses and different ways that we can kind of create an environment that's friendlier for all of us and easier to navigate. So the slides are available. There's a bit.ly link. I'm sure Guinsly will collate and share as well. But for those of you who, for some reason, need them right away, there is a link. I like to do this with most of my presentations because it's a part of my kind of professional practice as an expert in accessibility and inclusion, thinking about providing as many different formats and ways of conducting training and following information that I'm sharing. And also in the spirit of openness and moving towards open education, it seems like a very growing trend to be able to share and create, you know, kind of your content, creative content under Creative Commons license that can be adapted and reused for your own purposes. So I'm happy if anyone wants to take parts of my presentation, whether it's for your other jobs or assignments or anything like that at all. Feel free to adapt and reuse as you see fit. So I have to talk about the accessibility legislation, but I will preface by saying that I don't like to look at you know, disability, accessibility, inclusion work exclusively through the lens of the law. The problem with that is that when you only look at what you have to do and you look at specific frameworks or legislation and you cite it all the time, it sets a tone that inclusion for us is only something that we practice when it's mandated. And it's not something that we want to work towards in order to have a healthier, balanced, kind of higher functioning society where all of us can take part equally in different types of activities or learning events. But for your reference, I did include this one slide about accessibility legislation in Canada, so you have a clear sense of the different frameworks. We've got the AODA, it stands for Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and it was passed in 2005. We have the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, which came after, and then the Nova Scotia Accessibility Act, I believe, was 2017. In 2019, we introduced the Accessibility Canada Act, which largely does not really touch on the education sector, but it does touch on the built environment. And all the other acts, as you can see, are provincial level. So since education falls under the provincial mandate, every province that has rolled them out, and there will be others to come in different provinces, they kind of, I know that the Manitobans and the Nova Scotians have modeled their accessibility legislation on Ontario because we were first. And it's significant too, I think, in ensuring consistency of practice for those professionals and students who move across different provinces and you know, study or work at different colleges or universities, that there is a sense of consistency. It's also great to have been a leader in this area as well, and for libraries specifically, because we have a chance to set a certain standard of practice. For the AODA, there are a number of standards that have rolling deadlines, and there's a client services standard for providing inclusive public service. That deadline had passed, I think it was 2015. We had accessibility, like accessible formats standards, accessible multimedia, accessible websites. So there are different types of past and future deadlines which have kind of implemented certain requirements. And as with any legislation, these requirements are not always very clear. There isn't like a practical standard, but it's more of a theoretical standard. Canadian Human Rights Code is a very good example of that theoretical standard. There's a mention of good faith approach. There is no clarity as to what that is, but essentially, if someone, you know, wants accommodation and they self-declare, they shouldn't have to provide medical documentation. People are still required to do that, as universities and colleges have operated under that model for some time. So it really does come down to interpretation. What is the best standard? What is a practical standard? What can we as professionals in the field of public service do for our customers, I guess students or faculty, that is within reason? So that's kind of a bit of an introduction. as I said, I really find it very constricting to talk about legislation too much, because then it sets the tone that we're only providing accommodation because we have to, and that's not the case. If you would like to read a little bit more about each standard and how they relate to libraries, so again, talking specifically about the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, AODA, we have a great resource across OCO, Accessibility Information Toolkit for Libraries. It's a kind of easy to navigate, fairly simple website. Some content is a bit out of date, and we've started pre-lockdown, we've started working on updating that content. But as you can imagine, some of that work has paused in pandemic, but also during the summer where things tend to move very slowly. But I would encourage you to have a look and review at the public service, client service, I forget the exact heading for that section in the toolkit, but it's on accessible customer service, and it's available in English and in French, in PDF or on the website. So what I am actually more excited to talk about with you today is the concept of universal design for learning. It is a framework that has been increasingly adopted in teaching. And the beauty of it is that it is about creating a learning environment that is equally accessible to everyone, regardless of their abilities. So in 2018, there was a very exciting report that came out from Ontario government, and it essentially recognized UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, as the ultimate kind of goal for classroom environment. Whether you're talking about, a toddler classroom, JK, elementary school, high school, university, it doesn't really matter. This framework is about creating kind of a flexible learning environment. The values of independence and autonomy are very important there, insofar as whatever activities you're offering or whatever resources you're offering, everyone should be able to participate on their own without additional support from the instructor, and have kind of an equal experience in the process as their peers. It also significant because it recognized that people learn in different ways and will need a range of resources and instruction methods. So that means that whether or not they have a verified print disability, whether or not maybe they have a disability that they haven't been able to verify, they don't have medical paperwork, or they don't wish to go through that process. Maybe they don't have a disability, maybe they just learn in a very different way that's unique to them. It recognizes kind of the individuality within all of us, and the fact that a classroom learning environment needs to be positive and flexible for all of us in order to obtain, absorb, and digest the information that we receive, to be creative in our own learning process. So that also means creating access to resources in a multiple format way. So for instance, if an instructor sends out a syllabus, they might put it into a learning management system. They might send you a PDF as well and make it available in Word and make sure that it's fully accessible and tagged and structured. So creating one thing in a variety of resources from the starting point really reduces the reliance on any accommodation retroactively. Assigning readings, for instance, that are available digitally in accessible formats in a number of ways, in a PDF, in EPUB, maybe there is a print copy, maybe there is a large kind of format copy, and making that open to everyone so that they could choose the format that works best for them without having to self-identify. So that's an issue of dignity and, I guess to some extent, autonomy as well, without having to go to the instructor and ask for a certain format because they need it and then have to explain why they need it. That shouldn't be necessary. So equitable use of all resources, that's another thing that kind of thinking about the overall experience. If all resources are not available in the multiple kind of format, or the way that the instructor teaches is only accessible to some students but not for all, for instance, if they mumble, if they have their back to the classroom while they write something on the blackboard and someone can't lip read, that becomes a problem. So about like thinking about equitable use, but also equal experience. And then thinking about openness and inclusion more broadly, again, beyond disability, thinking about digital inclusion, thinking about socioeconomic and kind of immigrant status, you know, language barriers, all of those things. UDL plays a significant role in welcoming everyone equally to the learning experience, and, you know, helping people do their best in absorbing the information that they're given. So some of the examples I talked about, drawing on the blackboard while, you know, your back is to the classroom and talking, and then people might not be able to catch everything that you're saying, might not, you know, be able to lip read if that's what they do. But here on my screen are some of the things that kind of within university context fall under or benefit from UDL principles: syllabus outline, course delivery, student resources, assessment, online delivery, and this is very pertinent to today's kind of environment, exhibits, and web design too. So thinking about all the possible different audiences you could have, and then delivering that information in a way that's clear, concise, available to, like in print, available perhaps as a recorded lecture, as a summary, as many different formats as possible, really improves learning outcomes. So inclusion is also about cultivating a respectful environment. And I don't know why this screen of all of my slides has a little blue border around it, but maybe that just makes it extra special. Understanding user needs and asking what formats are helpful to them is important. You could say something like, you know, at the beginning of your reference interaction, you could say, okay, I now understand what resources you're looking for, you know, once you've discussed the topic. But then you could say, do you have a preference for specific formats? This provides, you know, students with a chance to not have to self-disclose. It's always a very kind of delicate balance, and it really does come down to people's comfort levels. Some people just prefer not to self-disclose, not to be looking for any treatment that they perceive might be preferential or somehow different from other people. And also, you know, it's their right not to. It's medical privacy. It's their information. So creating this kind of segue to talking about resources and clarifying, you know, what formats are useful is a very respectful way of having that conversation. You know, how do you learn best? What is useful to you? Are you relying on visuals? Do you want like longer articles? Do you want short summaries? What kind of information is helpful? And then using inclusive terminology. I guess it does come down to paying attention to how your reference interaction is going and how the individual self-identifies. In terms of gender, in terms of, you know, their identity, in terms of who they are, but also in terms of their limitations. If there are any cues about, you know, what they find challenging, and whether or not they require accommodation. So thinking about your language and coming to this from the perspective of inclusion, not from the perspective of disability. There's a really great accessibility expert at WCAG University, Yuta Trevinaris, and she really summed it up perfectly, and I can't stop quoting her, and I'm sure that Amy, who's on the call too, will maybe roll her eyes a little bit, but she talks about disability as a mismatch between the individual needs and their environment. And it is so spot on in terms of kind of our experiences for all of us. Sometimes our environment is just not giving us what we need out of it. So working with a person who is, helping you do research and supporting you in your learning and research needs, and having someone that you can rely on who is attuned and sensitive enough to kind of figure out and listen, and being a good listener, I think that those things work really well, and would result in a very positive interaction. I think having patience with patrons who need extra support is something that, it seems like it's too obvious to say, but it's true. We all get impatient. We all get kind of cranky sometimes with people who might be challenging, who might be asking the same questions over and over again, or who don't look like they're listening to our answers. Sometimes there's a reason for that. Sometimes people are stressed out. Sometimes there's anxiety issues. Sometimes there's a cognitive learning disability. There could be language barrier difficulties as well in online environment and communication. Perhaps there were acronyms that were used, or the subject was not too familiar to the student, and they're really trying to do their best and getting frustrated with the process. So kind of being able to turn your interaction to a very positive and respectful space for both yourself and the patron that you're working with, I think is key to kind of maintaining a very inclusive approach. And understanding how to refer and where. I think that, within the library environment too, we're not experts in everything. So understanding that we're here to provide the kind of reference and research support that the students might need, but it is beyond the scope of our work to, provide them support with like a mental health issue or something like that, or coach them how to write an essay. And very often, I think the writing essay part comes up quite frequently, from my experience anyway, working in kind of a virtual reference role years and years ago. And I think knowing where and how to refer people to services that are available to them on campuses is key. That could be kind of a check-in at the end of your interaction to say, okay, do you feel confident with the information that I provided you? Are those things useful? And then do you, anticipate any other challenges coming up? And if so, who else can you, would you be interested in working with? There are different resources that are available on campus. So that could start a very great conversation where you're able to offer some additional support and refer them to other services. So in the virtual environment, it's obviously challenging. Because we're typing, it's very tempting to use acronyms a lot, because otherwise we're spelling things out and it's taking longer. But acronyms, even if they seem sometimes very obvious, can create an information barrier for some students. As someone for whom English is acquired language, I still struggle with acronyms, even though I've lived in Canada for more than half of my lifetime, over 20 years. And I always appreciate it when people are able to spell out the acronym, at least the first time you use a certain terminology, spell it out fully, and then you can always put in brackets the acronym and then refer to it as such. But ideally, you would just spell out the word in full. Same goes for any kind of jargon, and in the library world, we have a lot of kind of funky terminology, even things like scholarly communication. What is that? It's just a very specifically librarian thing. So I'm kind of thinking about your audience and thinking about what that language will mean to them, and just keeping your communication as clean and simple as you can will be a way of practicing those universal design for learning principles of delivering information in an equal way that everyone can absorb in the same way. So if you just kind of incorporate that as your strategy or your practice, speaking to every single student online, being clear, being concise, being simple, using simple, uncomplicated words, just plain language. I think you will actually probably have shorter interactions and less need to clear things up. There is also an issue of undescribed links when you share content in a chat environment. If it's not very clear what the link is, I think sometimes even scrolling back through the kind of chat history, it could get a bit confusing. So thinking about being very clear in prefacing to say, like, this is the resource I'm going to share, this is what it contains, and then sharing the link. There's also an issue of challenging websites and web content, and unfortunately it's not something that we can do very much about. In a reference kind of interaction, if you found the link that has the content that they're looking for, of course you will share it. You're not going to have time to audit that website for WCAG 2.0 accessibility levels. But it could be that the website is not very easy to navigate with a screen reader, or even just navigate period for a sighted user. Some websites are really, really awful and difficult to work with. So be mindful that, if you're sharing specific content with your patron, to kind of listen to any type of feedback, and maybe they'll need an alternative resource if this is kind of too difficult to navigate. Taking virtual cues and reading the room is really hard online, especially if you're only kind of typing up messages and responding using chat. There isn't you can't look at someone's facial expression, you can't kind of read their body language. It becomes very difficult to understand if what you're providing is useful, but also, how are they finding the experience and the interaction? Are they happy? Are they frustrated? Is it too many resources? Are they overwhelmed? So checking in periodically to find out how the student is doing. Is this helpful? Is this enough? Are things clear? And then moving on again. Again, is like practicing those best practices with regard to keeping that dialogue very inclusive and respectful. Language barriers exist, and even if you don't use acronyms or speak in plain language, there are a lot of students who are international students. I was an international student myself, and I have always been delighted when I worked with librarians or instructors who were able to coach me through different things that maybe sometimes seem obvious, and explain things in alternative ways that were very simple and clear to understand. So again, keeping these interactions clear, simple, and easy to understand is helpful. It's very tempting to sometimes even squeeze in a joke, but some of the references might totally be lost depending on kind of where the person is coming from. And some jokes aren't funny to some, and some are. So, keeping things as simple as you can is probably the safest way to play it. And then technology challenges and troubleshooting too. Thinking about, digital natives, thinking about students who are new to using a laptop, or who have limited access or poor internet connection, things like that are always a consideration in the types of kind of interactions that you can have and the types of resources that are helpful. So that should all be kept in mind. There are advantages to the online environment. Of course, it's immediacy of use. You're a button away. It's a quick way to get a hold of someone and get great help. Written record can be helpful for many students with print disabilities who can refer to it and have all the resources in one place. Ability to spell out terminology that's relevant and provide direct links is important. If you're familiar with the subject that they're researching, perhaps you know a bit more than they do. So if you start using terminology that's specific to the subject where they haven't learned it yet, it's very difficult to get lost. Interactions can be flexible and personalized in a fairly private way. There isn't a student at a reference desk with like 5 other students waiting to talk to you behind them. They might be in this patron's classroom. They might not feel comfortable asking all the questions that they want to ask. So I think you have a great opportunity to have a deeper conversation that is very private, and where the patron can disclose like their comfort levels with resources, or say, like, I have a disability. They don't have to self-identify, but they might choose to, because it is like a fairly anonymous process. So they might feel more comfortable. And if they do, then you should feel free to ask, what kind of resources are useful for you, and what do you need out of this interaction? So thinking about referring students, if you're in kind of a reference interview, and there's a person who identifies that they're a student with disabilities, you can always mention that there is a center for students with disabilities on campus. Most universities will have a version of that kind of office. They might be called differently, but they essentially serve the same purpose. They verify disability claims. They provide kind of support with accommodation. That should be 1A, not accommodation. And then they also support students with like grants and bursaries to buy technology or laptops, and they help them with referrals. Oh man, like I really like spelling words today with like 2 letters of the same at the beginning of each word. Interesting. Sorry. Thinking about writing centers, very frequently students come asking for support about kind of how do I write my essay, or they're having issues kind of formulating their thesis. And again, these could be students with print disabilities or not, but very often students with cognitive disabilities struggle with writing, struggling with focus. So working with someone at a writing center would be very helpful. Mental health and wellness, especially right now, this is kind of a very key partner on campus for everyone, staff and students alike. So thinking about any kind of additional support that students ask about, at the moment, I think they're probably doing a lot of virtual events and drop-in meditation, yoga sessions, things like that, mindfulness, where that could be useful to a student. Student support groups and diversity groups, there's nothing like excellent peer networks. Students learn very well from one another. So if it's a student who's feeling like they're falling behind or feeling a bit marginalized on campus, especially within bigger universities, it might be kind of helpful to point them to all of these different resources. And of course, library accessibility services. Many universities, if not all of Ontario universities, have well-established library accessibility services who are frequently responsible for provision of alternative formats. And they'll digitize library print collections and turn them into accessible formats, and then hand them over to the students. So if that's something that they're asking you about, you can point them to the Center for Students with Disabilities or the library to clarify, what the steps are that they need to take in order to register with these services. So I have a final checklist. I think I'm looking at my phone. I'm doing okay. I'm overshot, but will probably be 1 more minute. But you've been a great virtual audience. I'm sorry I don't see anyone's faces, but it's always kind of fun knowing that you're talking to a nice group of people. So final checklist, reading cues in online environment and picking up on disability or equity disclosures to offer maximum support is kind of a nice thing to do. Paying attention and being a good listener, reading what the students or patrons are sharing with you and paying attention to those things is important to create a welcoming, inclusive environment. Avoiding jargon, acronyms, or complex terminology, and keeping language clean and simple and easy to understand is beneficial to all of us, especially when we're tired. And being respectful and using inclusive terminology, clarifying learning styles and research needs wherever possible. Always saying, okay, well, you know, the information you're looking for is available in a number of different formats from different publishers, or whether it's maybe a visual resource as well, all these things useful to you. Referring to campus services and support groups as needed. Are you aware of writing support you can go to on campus? And that's something that will come out of your interaction, where you're reading the cues and listening to them, and you could see that they're struggling with one thing or another, or they talk about it, so you will know how and where to refer them. Being patient with students who are having difficult time expressing themselves or who experience technological challenges is important. Giving them the space and the time to absorb your information that you're providing, or to figure out, you know, something else on their end, I think is important. We're always in a bit of a rush, but sometimes we just need to slow down and give people the space to process and digest the information you've shared. And avoid making assumptions about what resources or formats are useful. Always ask. So that's what I got. Oh, I can't believe I usually talk way too much. So this is really great discipline for me today. I'm happy to stop sharing my screen. You see my email contact is on the screen, katya@scholarsportal.info. I'm also on Twitter, but as of late, I'm kind of taking a bit of a slower approach to Twitter. There's a lot of information flying about that I just kind of want to take a little break, but email is probably the best way to reach me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if there are any questions, please feel free to share them in chat. And if not, I'll just mute myself and kind of hang around and see. I can kind of stay on for a few minutes afterwards.
Awesome. Thank you, Katya. That was a lot of great information. So if anyone has any questions that are popped into your head, feel free to let us all know via the chat.
I'll share a link to my presentation in chat as well, and then I'll just mute and I'll hang around as well.
Great.
Okay, great. So I will start sharing my screen. Great. Perfect. So this presentation is about policies and FAQs. Over the year, we had many common questions from our operator or coordinator. So we'll review those questions within this presentation. This presentation is divided into 3 parts. First is support, but it's mainly like an overview of the Ask Wiki, or sometimes we refer it by Spot Doc. And the 2 other parts are mostly a question about scheduling and shift logistics. start support. For that part, I'll do a live demo. For support, there are mainly two ways we can go. We can find information. It's either by go back on. Sorry, I need to move this around. If I go back to the web client, okay, I will unselect everything so that I'll write a note so that that operator knows what I'm doing. I'll go to profile. And then go to Scholars Portal or scholarsportal.txt. By support, meaning if you have any issue, you can go there on this profile and click on, you have to go to that, I guess, yeah. And this will go to the report issue form so that you can fill it with your name, email, and what type of issue. Is it a proxy login issue? Is it a missed shift? If somebody has missed their shift, inappropriate behavior, and others. And for support, I want to mention as well, this is a good place to verify. Am I on? Okay. This is a good place to see the schedule. Here on the Scholars Portal profile, to know also if we are currently there's enough people staffing, so you can know each school who are Wednesday. So with each school who are staffing between 2 and 3, so it should be Toronto, Lakehead, Western, and Ottawa. As an overview, there's what we call Spot Doc or Ask a Librarian space. On the email that I sent to you that contains your credential, it also provides a set of credential for the wiki space, but the wiki space and Spot Doc is almost the same synonym. So when you log into to this space, you have a lot of information regarding like blog posts. We had some ghost operator bugs in the web client. You can read about it, how to stop the notification sound when you receive a new chat. So there's a lot of blog posts you can read about. Also, there's you can find on the left side here, you can find information about what is a home thing first, library help FAQs. That's what we are reviewing today. We'll present today. Library profile is the same thing that you see on the web client website. It's quite slow. Okay, perfect. So you'll find the proxy password, contact information, and some other helpful information. You'll find information. This is a shortcut about proxy password. If you need all the proxy password in one page, you have to click here, and then the report issue form. So you'll click here to go to the report issue form. Service schedule to know exactly what is the schedule for today. And as well, texting services, that's more information, and training resources, all our trainings, upcoming webinars, guide and handouts, and all past presentation. All the slides are there, and the recording and webinar are also there. Perfect. That will conclude the overview of the wiki. So earlier this morning we see the web client. Now it was the wiki, and now I will jump back into the presentation. From now on, it's all of set of questions and answers. First question regarding scheduling and staffing. What do I do if I can't work on a shift? Our policy is to first to contact your local coordinator or to find someone at your institution that can either take your shift or swap, or you can swap a shift with that person. So that's the first option. And then if no school, if none of your colleagues can cover your shift, we ask that you send an email to the listserv, to the Ask Chat listserv, so that so that every school will know that your question or what shift that you want to be covered. Perfect. So that's what's about if you can't work on a shift. Okay, how can I tell if all schedule operators are present? I showed it recently. I'll go back to the library help. Today is Wednesday. I'll start at the beginning. So if we go to profile, and then on profile, we'll go to Scholars Portal. Any of the Scholars Portal, you'll see the schedule. And today is Wednesday. It's Toronto, Lakehead, Western, and Ottawa. Okay, for school. So you can go back to the chat here, and you see there's okay, there's Ottawa. There, at least Toronto is here. Ottawa is here. Lakehead here, and I'm missing one. I miss Western, yes. So those 4 are here. All the other one are maybe extra operator. Sometimes a school add extra operator, or maybe they are staffing, or maybe they are double staffing. But at least there's four schools should be there, and usually those extra operator, it's currently 3 p.m., meaning that there's operator who finish their shift by 3 p.m. at 3 p.m. So those like there's 2 Ryerson, there's 1 who will leave, and there's 2 Ottawa. Either Alison or Paul will leave. Will stop staffing. I'll go back into. Did I miss something? Perfect. And to recognize a school, it's the username is always follow this pattern, meaning the first name of the operator, then the school abbreviation. So West for Western, Mac for McMaster, STP for St. Paul, .fr meaning that this is a bilingual operator, and Gwehum mean Guelph-Humber. Perfect. Another question is, what if an operator missed a shift or relief doesn't arrive? What we ask is to report the absence within the 10 to 15 minutes of the shift. pay attention to whether the bilingual operator is online. If there is no bilingual operator, then do not wait 10 to 15 minutes. It's better to send to fill a report issue form as soon as possible, so that we at Scholars Portal will be aware of that. Perfect. So I already show you how to access the report issue form, either by the wiki. By the wiki, I didn't I don't believe I did show it to you. So when you go to the wiki, on the main page of the wiki, you'll find here, need help. So you click on the report issue form, and then it will go directly to that page, to this page. So perfect. Shift logistic. How many concurrent chats am I expected to work on? I believe Carolee has asked this question earlier. So our policy is to take as many chats that you are comfortable with. For sure, at the beginning, you'll do one chat at a time. Then after a while, maybe if you're comfortable with two or three, you can do that. Try to do your fair share. What does that mean is there's currently supposed to be four operator online. So we don't want an operator to pick up all the incoming chat. Like, okay, to be fast and pick up all the incoming chat. It's also good for other operator to leave it for other operator as well. Perfect. All operators are limited to 4 concurrent chats. Like I said, you can add more if you want, but usually 4 is enough, because otherwise your workload will be a lot to answer more than 4 chats. Another question: how do I decide if I should take a chat? First, match the patron to our library, meaning that when you receive an incoming chat, you'll see on the top left the avatar. It will say, let's say, make master. You'll verify if there's an operator from make master currently online. If there's an operator from make master, you'll leave it for make master, unless that operator is busy. If there's no one from McMaster, feel free to pick this chat. And we advise that you should pick chat from your institution, so it's easier because you already know your school, and pick up chat from users that do not have a home librarian on shift. So I already mentioned that. Like I said, here on the top left of the chat windows, you'll see this chat is from Toronto. Here there's a list of operator. You'll see if there's an operator from Toronto there. If there's no operator from Toronto, then you can pick this chat. Oops. How does this work for bilingual chat? Our policy, the bilingual operator must pick up all incoming French chat, because usually there's only one bilingual operator, so online, and then there's no, when library help will dispatch the chat, it will dispatch it to this operator, and it's important for that operator to pick this chat. And you can also answer, a bilingual operator can also answer question for in English. So that, I mean, English incoming chat. So that's great also. But we advise that you stay, let's say, below 4 chat minimum, because otherwise otherwise the French service will be closed. If you are busy, the French service will be closed. How does this work for text in chat? On each shift, on each hours, there's at least one operator that are assigned to the texting queue, meaning that all incoming texting or SMS chat will go to that operator. So it's important as well to pick up that incoming chat. And pick up texting chat if there is no local operator as well. And as well at the beginning of your shift, maybe at the beginning of the day, let's say you're working on a Saturday, or let's say you're working on a weekday at noon. If the service, currently the service opens at noon, when you're staffing the texting queue, it's possible that you will receive off hours incoming chat, because the texting service, I mean, user can still text even if the service is closed. But when the service will be open, you'll receive many incoming chats from, it will say chats from 10 hours ago, or 20 hours ago, or 5 hours ago. So it's important to pick up those chats. For the main other services, meaning the web service, the Scholars Portal service, if the service is closed, there's no way user can send a request, then can send question. But for the texting, even if it's off hours, they can still send messages. And those users will be notified that they send a text message during off hours, and then an operator will contact them the next day. Another question: what do I do if I'm in the middle of a chat and it's the end of my shift? So what do? I need to alert the user that the shift is ending. There's a can message available for you. You can click on the can message here and select. I believe it's miscellaneous. Oh no, sorry, it's closing, and then you'll be able to choose to select the appropriate can message. We also ask that if you can send a message to the conference room. The conference room is the main forum that all operators can interact or can see. Can interact, I can say. And you can send a message saying, are you available to pick up this chat? And if you find someone to pick up this chat, or if you find a specific user to pick up this chat, you can use the transfer icon to transfer it to that user. Or if there's no one, you can transfer this chat back to the main queue. Let's say, to the Scholars Portal queue. Perfect. We also advise that you also let the user know that you are transferring, that you would like to transfer the message, but it will be in the can message. What do I do if chats are being submitted and the service is scheduled to close? Let's say it's today the service will close at 4 p.m. Let's say it's 4:01 and you're going, or 3:59 you're about to close. Our policy is to log off promptly when the service schedule is closed. When the service is scheduled to close, as long as one operator is logged in and available, new chat can be submitted. So that's why it's important to log out promptly, or to change your status to busy, meaning that when you're online, let's say it's 3:59, you can switch your status, change your status from available to busy. Busy will notify all the website that this queue or this service is closed, meaning user cannot click anymore on the ask button. And let's say if a new chat comes in near closing time, meaning that you didn't, you're about to change your status to busy, but there's a new chat coming, you can, we advise that you pick this chat, you answer that chat, but you just let the user know that the schedule is closed, and if they can come back tomorrow, whichever day, next opening day. There's a kind of message associated with that as well. But it's important to pick up that chat. And then how do I help users at libraries I'm not familiar with? Let's say I'm not familiar with Algoma or Brock or Queens. First, make use of the tools in the chat software, meaning the library profile. The library profile contains a lot of topics. Make use of the conference room as well to ask other users if they're aware, or if they are aware of how to solve, how to answer that question, that reference question. If you hit a wall, refer back to the home library to look at their page, or to look at LibGuides. And what do I do if I don't know the answer of the patron's question? It's important to work with the patron to try to find the answer together. Meaning that the patron, even though if you might not be familiar with the subject, or you don't know, you have any clue, you don't have any clue of the subject, but asking, doing the online reference interview, doing the reference interview will help you refine the reference question. Ask your colleague again, and refer to the home library or subject function expert. They're a LibGuide. You can also refer the patron to their library expert. I mean, their librarian. How do I handle a question that is outside of the scope of the service? We do have a lot of user community question. Community user, I guess. And then and we need to remind that the user that the purpose of this service is to library and research related question. Sometimes they will ask question about how do I register for the med school, or how can I, if that school has, if that university has a theater, how can I watch, how can I purchase ticket to see that movie, or so those are outside of the scope of the service. And we ask that you use your professional judgment to determine if the question is out of scope. Practice chat triage, meaning that if you have too much question, or if you are busy answering other patron, you might refer them to go on the school website and instead of the library website. And that's about. What do I do if a patron is behaving inappropriately? I mentioned it earlier this morning. If a patron is making you feel threatening or uncomfortable, you can end the chat at any time. But we also advise that it's better to send a warning message before. And if the behavior does not stop, end the chat, and it will block the user IP address for 24 hours. And also operator must also complete the report issue form so that we can, we at Scholars Portal, or we can review what happened and see. So that concludes this presentation. You'll have the different address, the chat at scholarsportal.info. That will send a message to Sabina, me, and Amy, or you have our individual contact here. So with that, I will stop sharing. Do you have any question related with that part? Okay. Then it's passing 3, quarter past 3. It's time usually for questions. If there's no question at all, I'd like to romance. I'd like to thank everyone who attended, and thanks Paul, thanks Trevor, Ursula, Elizabeth, Carolee. There are a lot of operators from Ryerson. Thanks Chelsea from Brock, and thanks to our presenter and co-host Amy and Katya, and Kathryn as well previously. Thanks Nora as well for attending. The slides and all the recording will be available shortly on the training resources on the SpotDoc or Wiki. Today is supposed to be our annual VR training. We're supposed to have more topics, but because we're doing it remotely, it's hard to do 8 hours of trainings. There's some other topics that we might present in September, like doing a mini series of webinar, like 1 hour per week, something like. I will send out as well a survey to know how was this training, and if there's any topics that you would like us to cover as well. Yes. And keep in touch with your local coordinator to let them know if you want more information about the training or upcoming trainings. So thank you everyone for your time and for all your questions or